Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell. Brought to you by...
When Signs and Displays Direct was launched 15 years ago, it featured a complete line of banners and stands, product displays, and more. Today, the company is known as SDD and is the industry leader in turnkey, no-inventory POP programs. SDD has expanded into branding programs for both corporate and private label, as well as consulting services for retail showroom design and more. Visit sdd-us.com. That's sdd-us.com. All right, time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with me tonight, Joe Chambers. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, not a problem. For the folks who aren't familiar with, Joe is a songwriter. His current big project is he is the founder of the Musicians Hall of Fame in Nashville. So, I definitely want to discuss that, Joe. But first, let's give the folks a little bit of background on you.
What do you want to know?
Well, I know you went to Nashville without the intention of founding the Musicians Hall of Fame or becoming a big songwriter, but that's where things took you.
Yeah, neither one. I wanted to be a rock star, and that didn't quite happen. And so, I didn't want to dig ditches either. And so staying in the music business was, in any form or fashion, was all I really cared about. So when I got here and I found out that you could be a songwriter, because I can't sing, that was the path I chose.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that always intrigues me is how chance meetings or unexpected meetings can play a big role in people's lives and careers. And when that happened with you, if I recall, when you got to Nashville and were trying to make some inroads at CBS.
Yeah, I came to Nashville, like I said, pursuing being a rock star 120 pounds ago. And I was going down Music Row, and the band that I loved, that I wanted to be like, was Chicago. Our band had a horn section and all that. And so I got to CBS Records, and that was the label that Chicago was on, and I just whipped in because of that reason. And the night before we had finished mixing our demo tape. I'm from Georgia. And I live in Columbus, Georgia was my home. And we had gone up to Atlanta to cut a demo tape. And this is a rabbit hole, man. But the reason we won the National Battle of the Bands sponsored by the JCs back in 1972. And so that prolonged the life of the band, because I thought, we all thought we were either going to go to Vietnam or go to college. And then President Nixon ended the draft. And so that means I didn't have to stay in college anymore. So, because I knew that music was what I wanted to do. And so our keyboard players, Drew Carden, his uncle, Hugh Carden, or Sonny Carden, was Conway Twitty's personal manager. And Conway Twitty's dear friend was Dick Clark. And so, pre-internet, pre all this information, age that you can just pick up, hit a button and find out whatever you wanted to. We didn't know anything about the business. We didn't know, what a publisher was or a producer or anything else. So it's who you knew, and so, if you wanted to be in rock or pop music, and Dick Clark was was a major figure. And so um, after we won the Battle of the Bands, Conway said he was living in Oklahoma City. He said, if you guys come out here, I'm not going to produce you, but I'll oversee a session with you guys and I'll send it to Dick. And so um, we went to Oklahoma, we recorded, and Conway sent the tape to Dick Clark, and which actually was another big step for me, because when Dick heard the music, I was very timid at that moment, songwriting anyway. And I wrote all the music, but I didn't write lyrics. I didn't want to, I didn't want the other guys to know what I was thinking. So they want them to, guys will pick at you,
Oh, exactly.
if you get too mushy or something in a song. And so, but I wrote one song, and I wrote about halfway through it, and I got the singer to finish up the lyrics to it, and that was the song that Dick Clark said was the best written song of the batch. So that gave me the confidence to pursue being a lyric writer and not care what anybody said. And
well, Dick Clark's a pretty good judge of hit records.
Yeah, he was, and that, like I said, that was what kind of drugged me out of being so timid, in that
right.
respect. And so fast forward to Conway moved to Nashville, and the first tape we did out in Oklahoma, nothing happened with it. So we did it again in Atlanta, and Conway had moved up here. Was the only reason that I came here, to see him, to have him send the tape to Dick Clark again. And there was some kind of emergency. I think his bass player, Big Joe, I believe, had gotten in a car wreck, and so and we had another appointment in Muscle Shoals the next morning, so we had to leave town. So before we left, we said, well, let's see where Music Row is, and went riding down Music Row, and a bunch of little bitty houses, and didn't like, is this it? Is this the music? I was expecting Hollywood,
Right.
And then so when we got to where it was like Capitol Records, and then Columbia, and so pulled in front of Columbia, went in with the demo, walked. There was a guy sitting on the sofa right next to the door reading a Billboard magazine, and I thought he was just like me, just another goon, waiting to hope somebody would give him a listen. And so I kind of nodded, said hello to him, and he kind of nodded back. And a couple more steps, I'm at the secretary's desk, and who ended up being a really good friend. Her name was Norma Jean. While I was asking her to get somebody to listen to the tape, I had no idea that you just didn't yank somebody out of an office, especially in this town. And
well, that's the way it happens in the movies.
Yeah, it can happen any way that you've ever heard, because it has happened for somebody else that way, but usually it's a little more complicated than that. So I guess she said that you had to leave the tape, and we brilliantly only had one copy of it, so I couldn't leave it if I wanted to, because we had to be in Muscle Shoals. So turned around, and I had the front door pulled open of Columbia, about to step back out to the car, and the drummer, a guy named Billy, and the lead singer was named Jimmy, and I don't remember which one said it, but one of them. Oh, I didn't tell you this. So the trumpet player, it used to be our trumpet player, Steve Lott, had told us that he had a third cousin that lived in Nashville that was a producer, which first off, country didn't mean anything to us, and we didn't know what a producer was either. And so I had the door open. They're standing behind me, and one of them said, "Hey, what was Steve's cousin's name that lives up here?" And one of the other ones said, "I think his name is Billy Sherrill." Well, the guy I had spoken to sitting on the couch dropped the billboard in his lap and said, "I'm Billy Sherrill." And a week later, were recording in Columbia Studio A. So that was how I met Billy. And then after meeting Billy, we hit it off. Just, I don't know, probably because I didn't know who he was, or I'd have been slobbering and
Exactly.
And so, and everybody else did, and so I guess he kind of liked maybe somebody not freaking out over him. Plus, I think he was just sitting there listening to us and felt sorry for us. I guess.
Whatever it takes, right?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Then if I could jump in real quick, Joe, now for our non-country viewers, Billy Sherrill is one of the most important guys in country music, both as a songwriter and producer. He had 20 number one hits with Tammy Wynette, Charlie Rich, George Jones. He Stopped Loving Her Today. He produced that. So I mean, if you look at all the big monster hits of this late 60s, 70s, 80s, Billy Sherrill's fingerprint is on a big chunk of it. Absolutely legendary guy.
Yeah. And funny enough that I still didn't know who he was. I mean, when we went up to his office, there were gold records all over the walls, platinum records, so much so that they were stacked up against the floor on the wall, all around, like trim going around the bottom of the wall, coming out 3 or 4 deep everywhere. And so I was like, well, he's somebody, George Jones and Tammy and all those, Charlie Rich. Well, I had heard Stand By, back in the 60s, AM radio played a lot of stuff.
Right.
And Billy had produced records that had crossed over. And Stand By Your Man, as country as it was, still got airplay on the pop stations.
Absolutely.
And Charlie Rich definitely did with Behind Closed Doors and The Most Beautiful Girl, and things like that. So I was familiar with Charlie Rich and the song Stand By Your Man. I don't really know that I knew Tammy Wynette, whatever, but so anyway, yeah, we got up to Billy's office and he listened to the demo and he's like, well, how would you like to do a spec session? And I was like, what's that? And he goes, well, that means we'll pay for the studio and, we'll give you like 3 days, 2 days to record and a day to mix. And if we like it, then we have first refusal. I said, well, what's your first refusal? And he goes, well, that means that if we like you, since we pay for the studio time, then we have the first dibs on signing you. I said, okay. Again, I was so nonchalant about it because I didn't know who he was and how important and what he was offering,
Right.
So I didn't really beginning to get an inkling of it until Billy, he said, hey, have y'all had lunch yet? And I said, no. He goes, why don't you go have lunch and come back here in a couple hours? Oh, okay. So when we left there, I had set up a meeting, I thought, over at RCA across the street. So we just went over there. And it wasn't until I went over there and tried to see the appointment that I had who had canceled on me. And I said, well, we just left this guy across the street, Billy Sherrill, and the secretary's jaw dropped. And she said, you met Billy Sherrill? And you need to get out of here and don't let him know you came over here because that's the heaviest cat in town, quote. So we kind of nonchalantly kind of eased out of RCA and like we ain't done nothing, we just kind of kicked the can down the sidewalk, got in the car and was hoping that Billy wasn't back downstairs looking out the window because he didn't have a window in his office, which is why he was sitting in the lobby. So when we came back, that's when he, told us about doing the demo. We still kept our appointment in Muscle Shoals, and we went to Muscle Shoals Sound. There was a guy, Jerry Masters, who was an engineer down there, and we did know that the Rolling Stones had recorded there, so that was the hip part about that. And we had another one of our ex-members in our band had a connection with Jerry, and so that's how we kind of planned this trip from Columbus to Nashville, Muscle Shoals, and then coast home on fumes. All the money we had, and so we were back the next week, and we recorded, and then that started Billy had a guy named Steve Popovich come down, and on a couple of months later, and Steve was worked with Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears in New York and for CBS, and they kind of like we were good, but we weren't Chicago, and we weren't Blood, Sweat and Tears, and I wasn't a good enough songwriter at the time to even come close to competing. I've told people maybe we could have been a band kind of like the Buckinghams, or if we had songwriters that could write us some top 40 songs and stuff, but it gradually petered out over over the course of a year, and so that was kind of the end of a long road with that band. Start when you're 14 years old, and so I really didn't want to be in a band any longer, but being, like I said, I can't sing, so the option was to try to be a songwriter. And so when I quit the band in '77, I came back up to see Billy, and he and Conway both would always see me and listen to my attempts to write and give me critiques. And so I about once, maybe twice a month for about a year, up until May of '78, I drove to Nashville and back, with my song attempts. And I finally moved up here in May of '78, and about a month later, I had my first major cut on a guy named Johnny Paycheck. And he was coming off of this huge, huge record called Take This Job and Shove It.
Yep.
And I was lucky enough to get a cut, no co-writers, just by myself on that album. And so that kind of started everything. And then I was writing in my publisher's office. Al Gallico and Billy Sherrill had a company together. They signed me. And which was ironic. Al had published the Zombies and the Animal, House of the Rising Sun, and Tell Her No When She's Not There. So it was a really fun place for me to be with Al.
Yeah.
And I was up in the publishing office one afternoon, and I was co-writing a song with somebody, and the entertainment director for Opryland Hotel came in and they were shooting a breeze, and I had no idea he was talking about me, but my friend was telling him, he said, we need to find a good house band. And we're tired of booking bands and not knowing what kind of band we're getting every week. And this was for the big Stage Door Lounge Club in Opryland Hotel, which at the time was like 2 stories and had a balcony and kind of Vegas-like club. And so my friend said, yeah, I know this guy. And he told kind of like the story I just told you. And so when he said, well, who is it? And he said, him. And I was like, no, I'm not in another band together.
Been there, done that.
He's been there and done it. And I came up here to be a songwriter now, And but they made a really good offer, and I really needed the money. So I put a band together, and we were the house band there for about a year. I actually met my wife at Opryland while we were playing out there, and so eventually, we, in short order, we got married, and that ended the road, being on the band, and so I got back to songwriting again, and but I'd already had before the band. I had already, like I said, I got my first cut within a month of being up here, and had others. Actually, I got another one in September on a guy named Johnny Duncan, and and Paycheck was supposed to cut another one. Everything was rolling along well with the songwriting, but when I got back, and I could just get back into this full-time songwriting, uh, Conway Twitty's nephew, Larry Jenkins, and he was also got him in my band as well. And we were really close friends, and I loved writing with Larry, and so we wrote a ton of stuff together. And
Well, you guys wound up writing quite a few. I know you did Somebody Lied.
Yeah.
That went to #1 for Ricky Van Shelton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we got back. We were real lucky. CBS was kind of always my home base, kind of. So even though I wasn't working there, they let me go back in the Quonset hut in Studio A or B if it wasn't being used. And we'd just sit back there and write songs in the Quonset hut. And
wow.
Well, yeah, which was great, And so we wrote a song called Good Ones and Bad Ones, and George Jones loved it. So George recorded it, and then right after that, they asked me if I wanted to work at CBS in A&R. So I did. I mean, it wasn't like a high position. I mean, I listened to all the songs that came in and that kind of thing. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I left Columbia. Me and the head guy did not get along well, other than me and Billy did. And when Billy pulled out of the building, I kind of did too, and unplanned.
That happens.
And so, and Billy was getting ready to retire, and so Tree Publishing signed me, and me and Larry both. And so we wrote a lot of songs for Tree as well. And you know how the music business is, it's feast or famine. And although I had a lot of songs cut, from Conway Twitty, did 3, Tammy did 3, George did 3, Gene Watson and Mel McDaniel and Donna Fargo and Lacey J. Dawson.
That's a pretty impressive list there, Joe.
Old timers, and then Ricky re-recorded Somebody Lied, which Conway had done, and Ronnie McDowell did one, and then Randy Travis did one called "Oh Late by 10," and that was the title cut of his third album. And
yep.
Conway had on the front of one of his albums, this album contains the hit singles This, and Somebody Lied. And he had this is like 1985, and everybody was shooting for crossover material at that time. Alabama had kind of flipped everything around because they were selling platinums albums, because crossover. So traditional country was not as popular as it had been at that moment until Randy Travis hit town. And then Randy flipped everything around to where, it used to be a 200,000, 250,000 records albums was a good sell, and the artist would put out, 2 or 3 albums a year, like getting it with Conway. he would put out maybe 3 albums a year, and that'd be, like I said, 250,000 sales 3 times a year if you could get on all 3 of his albums, you know.
Right.
And then if you were lucky enough to get a single, you could make some really good money. So, but he had put out a really, really traditional sounding song, and it was the first time it did anything that kind of stiffed on him. So he decided not to release Somebody Live, and that was kind of the straw that broke this camel's back, because I had seen the Judds on Entertainment Tonight singing a song that Larry and I had written, and how great it was. And then when the album came out, and they had shifted, course and gone to another direction, that was kind of a letdown, And these kind of things, these highs, you had this scale of, well, it's going to come out in 3 months, and then you're going to, and it just gets drug out for a long, long time. So it's not, they don't just kind of get you, up and then drop you immediately. I mean, that happens too, but a lot of times it gets drug out for a long time. So it really hurts when you crash, and you don't get a song that you thought you were going to get. And George Jones on there was a local show. Well, not a local, it was filmed locally, but it was Ralph Emery show.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my next single, and it's be singing one of our songs, and of course it would be on the album, but it didn't make it. Johnny Cash did one of my songs, and the album came out. It didn't make that. Well, it happens,
Right.
And so, and then like Randy Travis too, Randy said, this is going to be my second or third single, and the title cut of the album. Well, it was the title cut of the album, but it didn't become the second or third single. That's the difference between a motorcycle and a house,
Exactly.
Now, when Garth started selling 10, 6, 7, 8, 10 million records, you could have an album cut, and nobody ever heard it except those who bought the record and buy a really nice house, It's just from that, So, but so once Conway said, he said, I'm too old and this is too country and they're not going to play it. I told Larry, I said, I got a baby coming, and I got to do something else. So I opened up a guitar shop, and as soon as I opened the guitar shop up, within a year, and got good and in debt, and not knowing what I was doing, and in the wrong town for a guitar shop. They called up and said, Ricky Van Shelton did cut Somebody Lied, and it's going to be a single. I'm like, who the heck is Ricky? And also, up until that time, a new artist was kind of the kiss of death, but that all changed. And it all flipped over to new artists. Old artist was almost a kiss of death.
Right.
So, and then Randy right after that, and then Tammy put out a song called Beneath the Painted Sky that we wrote, me and Bucky Jones, and that was her first video she'd ever done, and that was fun. But all this was, I couldn't smooze anymore, and I couldn't hang because I was out in 30 miles outside of town running my guitar shop, and when everything was happening, when I was hot and people were wanting to co-write with you, that was successful as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, it didn't exactly, but I don't know that it wasn't the best thing because I had a really fun career and opened up a lot of other doors being in the retail and the guitar business. I really felt failure-ish being a merchant, not a creative person, but the opening a chain of stores eventually and being able to take a empty building and turn it into a store would kind of fill that creative void.
Oh, it definitely is a creative process.
Pardon me?
I said, doing that is definitely a creative process because without the creativity, all it is just brick and mortar.
Right. And it was fun for me to go in and, and design them. And, like I said, it kind of, took the place of writing a song every day or every night. And, I built a number of guitar shops over the years. And so, and also when I got into the vintage guitar into the market, which I didn't know anything about till I started, um, that I met people who opened up doors that I had not been through yet musically with pop, rock artists. So it allowed me to, not because of me being a talented songwriter or anything, just because I was selling guitars, honestly. But it allowed me to, be able to hang out backstage with Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young and the Who and other artists. And so when I got to the point where I was kind of ready to do something else after 25 years or so of doing that, that's when the idea came to do the Hall of Fame, because there wasn't one for music. And my previous background, I had built enough buildings that I felt comfortable buying a big building and just doing it myself, because it costs a lot of money to hire a designer, especially a museum designer. And plus you just need to know about what it costs to do things structurally, not to mention cosmetically in the ambiance of
Right.
building, So in a way, if I hadn't had done the guitar shops, I would never have. Plus, like I said, it opened up these other doors that when 6 degrees of separation is true. And, somebody, if you're a plumber, you know a lot of plumbers,
Right.
So, which I need right now because I got a leak at home.
So if there's any plumbers watching, let us know and we'll get you in touch with Joe.
I'll get it fixed before they see this.
I hope so.
I'll be gone. So anyway, it all kind of came together in my head anyway.
Yeah.
Now, truthfully, had I known what I was about to step into, I don't know. I tell everybody that I would do it over again. I can't imagine not doing it, but I don't know. Let's think about it.
Well, I'll tell you, in thinking about it, I'm amazed that there was no Musicians Hall of Fame prior to you founding this.
Yeah, I was too. That's why I did it. That was the only reason. That we didn't need another rock hall. We didn't need another country hall. And it just, and of course, working at CBS and producing records and doing my own demos, producing the demos, and Billy was very generous when letting me look over his shoulder. And I was one of the very few people, if anybody else, actually, that he would allow to, other than the engineers that were in there, to go in and sit in on Marty Robbins sessions and Tammy Wynette and George Jones, and so I got to watch how he produced, and you do, that's how you learn. So it's to see the master do it. Some of it's got to rub off on you, a little bit.
What's one of the things about watching those sessions? Say Marty Robbins. What's something that stuck with you to this day that you remember about being in there watching that session being recorded with him?
Well, in Nashville, they used to do everything pretty much live. The rhythm section, backup vocals, everything's in the studio at one time, and you really got a fat sound. Unlike a lot of times today, they'll stack. They'll build the song. They'll start out with maybe drums and bass, and then later add the rhythms, and guitars and whatever, and all the sweeteners. And back then, he'd have the backup vocals and everybody in there at one time. And oftentimes, even the master vocal would be often the scratch vocal. The first or second go around, just singing the song, because you hadn't got used to it yet. A lot of times it was a little extra something in it that it had a little called fairy dust. It was it hadn't gotten mundane yet.
Right. Still fresh.
Still fresh. So, but with Marty, I think the thing that I remember the most about Marty, and he was a really nice guy, and Billy was really fond of him too, but it was just him and me and Billy in the control room of Studio A one time, and Marty was like, Billy, I'm telling you, this new video stuff, this is going to be the biggest thing that ever happened to music, and MTV and CMT were just kind of getting started, and Billy went, "No, man, it's going to kill the romance." And he goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, the guy who would have heard the song on the radio and visualize the lyrics in places that he had been and people that he knew, he's going to always see what the video producer created rather than using his own imagination." And Marty was like, "No, man, it's going to be the biggest thing that ever happened to music," and they were both right, and
exactly.
So that was that always stuck with me, just that one conversation there.
Yeah.
But Billy's technique in the studio was, he always, he could play. He was an incredible musician, and but he hated to step on their toes, because he said, if I've got to go out there and play everything, then why do I need to hire them? If I just leave them alone, they'll give me a great track, which is actually one of the problems of being in Nashville or LA probably too, but especially in Nashville, the music will sound, it all boils down to the song, because these musicians can make somebody reading the phone book sound unbelievable. But if it doesn't connect with the public, at least with country music, lyrically, and again, this was then, not so much now maybe, it had to be, you really had to know, and Billy had the ears of the public to know what songs would touch somebody, and
right.
And he, a lot of times, the Columbia Records did not want him to release Take This Job and Shove It, and they did not want him to release The Most Beautiful Girl in the World, which was a massive hit at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he just, but he did it anyway, and proved him wrong.
Yeah, well, even he and George disagreed about He Stopped Loving Her Today. And Billy was adamant.
That's a whole other interview, but Bobby Braddock and Curly Putman wrote the song, and I asked Bobby one day when it first came out and it was kind of climbing the charts. I said, "How did you come up with that song?" And he goes, "It was a joke. We just thought it was kind of a morbid joke that, hey, the guy stopped loving her because he died. Ha ha ha, kind of a thing." And then they went, "Wait a minute, that's strong." And so they took it to Billy, and Billy had them rewrite it or add to it 2 or 3 times over a period of time, because Billy felt that they had given away too quickly in the song that the guy had died was why he stopped loving her, and he wanted them to kind of try to drag it out, and not let you know that he was dead until they said that she came to see him just today, in that line talking about the
Mm-hmm.
at the cemetery or whatever. And so at that time, and and George and I were friends too. So I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't agree with. He was, he was mixing things that were not good for him, um, and especially for his voice and our behavior. And um, so when Billy gave him the song and said, "Look, I'm going to cut the music tracks. I know what key that you sing in. You just take us out on the road with you and learn this song." And so George did. And when he came to town, when he got back in off the road, they went in and tried to have him sing it. Well, he was singing the wrong melody. He was singing the melody to help me make it through the night. And so Billy was like, "George, you can't do that. That's not what the writers wrote." And he goes, "Yeah, but I like it better." He goes, "Yeah, well, so will Chris Christopherson when he becomes the third writer on the song." So go learn it. Learn the Bobby and Curly's lyrics or melody. So this goes on, and it took a year and a half before he finally nailed it. And Billy had the strings put on it, mixed it, and George happened to be in his office one afternoon. And he said, "Hey," and George was walking out the door, and Billy said, "Whoa, hey, you want to hear that song?" He said, "All right." So George just stood in the doorway, and Billy played him the final mix on "He Stopped Loving Her Today." And when it got over with, George said, "That's the most morbid SOB I have ever heard, and they being radio, will not play it." And Billy, "So you may be right, Jones, but it ships to radio Monday." And he said, I bet you $100 that it does." And George said, "Well, you got to bet." And so I've told people it was the best $100 that George ever lost.
Absolutely. All righty. We'll tell you what, on that note, we will bring this episode to a close. Everybody, thank you for watching. Joe, thank you for being here. Everybody, have a good night.
All right, man. See you.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.